Wendy, if you want to. Welcome everyone to our third series from the Southwest Association of Pre-Law Advisors. Welcome on behalf of the board and our members. My name is Barbara Kirby, and I'm the treasurer of SWAPLA. We have been very pleased to present the wonderful law school admissions people who have agreed to come on in our panels. And I think that this one is one that is especially important to students who are in the current admission cycle. And it's about maximizing the softs for law school admissions, focusing on personal statements, resumes, letters of recommendation. I want to introduce first of all, we have our webmaster, the wonderful Dr. Wendy Watson, and our vice president, Dr. Ana Alvarez, and they are going to be monitoring the chat today. And so they will make sure to get together any of your questions and anything that we don't cover during what I'll call our direct examination. We will, we'll definitely get to all of your questions. And I welcome all of the students and pre-law advisors who are on here today. We have a fantastic panel. And as I've said before, my job is just to introduce them, moderate the questions, and stay out of the way. And so that's what I will try to do today. I love introducing people and reading off their resumes, but it takes a lot of time. So I'm going to not have that fun opportunity for me and instead give a brief introduction of each of our panel members. And then I will invite them to tell you about their school and their views about what the soft skills are that you bring to your application. So first of all, we have April Fox, the Associate Dean and Director of Admissions and Financial Aid at the University of Tulsa College of Law.
Hello, everyone.
Next, then we have Miguel Hernandez, the Assistant Dean of Admissions at the UNT Dallas College of Law. Then we have Lauren Fidele, the Admissions Coordinator at Texas Southern University, the Thurgood Marshall School of Law. So happy to have Lauren with us today.
Everyone.
Right. Next, also from Houston, we have Pilar Mensah, the Assistant Dean for Admissions at the University of Houston Law Center, our other Houston school. I'll have to throw in there that yes, there is South Texas College of Law, but Alicia Kramer was on our first panel. So we will have covered Houston with our panels. Next, we have Heather Stovall, I believe, Associate Director of Admissions at my alma mater, the Dedman College of Law at Southern Methodist University. Then next we have Aurore Abu, the Assistant Dean for Admissions and Enrollment at the University of Arkansas, Little Rock, the Bowen School of Law in Little Rock, Arkansas. What I love about today's panel is we have all of the areas covered. We're from Houston to Oklahoma and out to Arkansas today. So we have a very geographically diverse group of law school admissions professionals. So I'm going to go in the same order, and I'm going to give each one of you the minutes to talk about your law school and to give a word about what you consider the importance of the soft factors as compared to the hard factors, the Lsat GPA. So Dean Fox, if you would begin for us.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the introduction, and I'm so happy to be here today. I'm very grateful to be among my colleagues and to meet the students. It's been looking forward to this for a long time, so thanks. So I represent the University of Tulsa College of Law. We are a small private law school tucked up into the corner of the northeastern northeastern corner of the state of Oklahoma. So we are your neighbors. We are again a small law school, 9-to-1 student faculty ratio. So there's lots of opportunity to know and be mentored by your professors. Being the size that we are, our students often tell me that one of the things they appreciate about TU is that they don't feel like they have to compete for the resources that we have, such as academic support, bar exam prep program, and a professional development office that prepares an individualized career plan for every single first-year law student. And then they walk with each student. They shepherd them through their law school experience to the very end to help them maximize their potential to not only be practice ready, but to secure employment after graduation. Our students go into a variety of jobs after law school, including everything from corporate law to family law to immigration law to estate planning. But a common thread that runs throughout our applicant pool, and a philosophy that is shared by the law school administration here, is that we all share a desire to give back to our communities. Tulsa has a robust experiential learning program, which includes 4 separate clinical programs that are focused on areas of community advocacy, social justice, and bridging the access to legal resources gap that many communities across America experience. And so I, for one, really appreciate that is a common thread that runs throughout our law school community. Also, TU, though we are private, the sticker price that we have, our tuition cost, is surprisingly low, especially for a private law school, but also in some cases lower than some state programs as well. And if anyone has questions about tuition or anything, I'm happy to answer questions later. When we talk about the softs and what it means to maximize them, I really love this topic because we know, all of my colleagues here on the panel, we all share this sentiment, I'm sure, that people are more than just numbers. So the hard factors would be LSAT and GPA. But again, people are more than that. And so what I will share my thought about the softs is that when you take the time to leave no stone unturned when it comes to your addendums, your personal statement, your resume, and your letters, your letters of recommendation, you're giving yourself a better shot to stand out from other applicants who will not invest the time to do the same. And believe me, there are many applicants in our applicant pool, and I'm sure this is true for other my colleagues as well on the panel, that it really does. You can see the difference, people who care about their application and people who maybe care a little less. And so what it shows to your schools when you take the time to highlight those soft skills like leadership, like service, like your work ethic, all the wonderful things you've done at your schools and in your communities and in the employment you've had, your military service. What that shows is, number one, you care about your application. And secondly, it gives the reviewers of your application more to consider beyond just the LSAT score and the GPA. And then finally, I think it adds just an overall polish to your application. Again, you've taken that final step. You didn't have to, but you did. And the fact that you invested that extra time actually bodes very well, I think, in the eyes of those who will be casting votes after they've read your application. So I hope that kind of is a good opener for others to share. But those are my initial thoughts. And again, I'm just very grateful to be here. Thank you all.
Thank you so much. Good segue into the others as well. So Dean Hernandez.
Thank you.
Why don't you tell us about UNT Dallas?
Yeah, I tell you, Dean Fox did a great job of teeing off. And so I got to play catch up here. So, UNT Dallas College of Law is an absolute wonderful place. We're located in downtown Dallas. The building here was built, it's an old municipal building that was built in 1914, underwent a $70 million renovation about 7 or 8 years ago. And this place is one of the most beautiful places I've had the good fortune of working in law school. And I've seen a lot of law schools, so this one's pretty impressive. Coupled with that, the affordability and accessibility is really critical for us. We are one of the most affordable law schools in the country at approximately $19K per year for full-time students in the 3-year program, and approximately 13 for part-time students over a 4-year stretch. So it is possible for students to work their way through law school here and leave with a relatively low debt or no debt at all if they play their cards right. So one of the, I think, probably most interesting pieces about our programs are the clinics, because a lot of clinical programs will do a single lane or maybe 2 or 3 lanes. We do multiple lanes here. The clinical programs want to ensure that our students have an accessibility point to a wide variety of legal areas, so that if down the line they decide to hang their own shingle, they'll have a wider array of people that they can serve. We have a lot of connectivity with the Dallas Bar Association, the Hispanic Law Student Association, Mexican American Bar Association. BALSA is very well connected with the Black Law Student Association, very well connected with the legal community out here. And they do a really great job of reaching out to us and trying to connect with us. So a lot of good opportunities here. As it relates to the soft skills, I think Dean Fox touched on a couple of things that I think are really important. That's leadership demonstrated. If you're a true leader, a good leader will tell what they've done and demonstrate it in that way. If you use the word leader over and over again, leaderly, and you're a leader and all this good stuff, then it's kind of like you didn't really do the work. So one thing is that I will tell you all is that if you take the time to invest in your application process to law school, particularly your personal statement, I think one of the most underrated pieces of your application, it should be a transformative experience. Now, let me say that again, because I know somebody's out there going, okay, yeah, transformative experience. I'm kind of falling asleep on that. The fact is that the transformative experience is for you, not for us, right? So you've completed college, or you're at the pinnacle of completing college. You should stand on that pinnacle and look around at that accomplishment and examine it through the personal statement, so you can see the distance from whence you came and be able to demonstrate that in a personal statement and really give an impression to an admissions committee of who you are as a person. It is your interview, so take advantage of it.
Thank you so much. Let's pass to Lauren now, down in Houston.
Hey everyone, thanks again for having me here. I like you said, my name is Lauren Fideli. I'm the admissions coordinator here at Thurgood Marshall School of Law. We're located on the campus of Texas Southern University here in Houston, Texas, just south of downtown. So we're in the center of the city. As a public institution and as an HBCU school, our goal of our law school is to prepare students not only for academic and professional excellence, but to also be an engine for diversification of the legal profession and to protect, improve, and pass on our legacy of social progress. In keeping with the values and ideals of our namesake, Justice Thurgood Marshall, over the past 70 years and onward, with the help of our students, our law school has been a catalyst for initiating conversations, research, and taking action to empower our local disenfranchised and underserved communities. In addition to our curriculum that places, particular emphasis on bar preparation for our students are also provided with a plethora of opportunities to get involved and acquire hands-on experience, that experiential learning, to advance their professional goals, but also to work with our local communities through whether it be our legal clinics, our externships, our student organizations, our regionally recognized Earl Carl Institute, among many other resources available to our students. At our university or at our law school, in addition to our JD program, we also offer an LLM program focusing on immigration and naturalization law. But regardless, we are always open to extending our Tiger family and in looking at applications. We really do look at both the soft and hard skills, like my colleagues have mentioned. I think personally, it helps give a 360 view of an applicant. You know, an applicant isn't just a number. The softs really give us a holistic view of you, and not just, you know, the quantitative information, but also the qualitative information allows us to get that 360 view of you as an applicant. So it's important to highlight that. I agree. A personal statement is really important. I would even say it's probably the third most important thing on your application, because it's really, you know, your opportunity to, you know, portray yourself and talk to our admissions committee directly. So the soft skills are really important, and don't underestimate them. They are taken into consideration.
Thank you. Let's go to Dean Abu of the Bowen School of Law in Little Rock.
Hi, everyone. My name is Erore Abu. I am the Dean of Admissions and Enrollment Management here at the University of Arkansas at Little Rock, William H. Bowen School of Law. We are the only law school in the state's capital, and I think that positions us favorably for a lot of opportunities for our students. We are a public law school, and we are located in Central Arkansas, which I think is another great position for us. Our students come from all over Arkansas, of course, but also all over the nation. I should probably also mention that I am a 2016 graduate of Bowen myself, and I'm actually from the state of New Jersey. One of the great things about Bowen, besides our core values, which you see down here somewhere, access to justice, professionalism, and public service, I think is just our affordability. Our tuition and our fees come in just about under $17,000 a year. And so that's something that we are very proud of. And that's one of the ways that we go about fulfilling one of our core values of access to justice. Here at our school, I think it's a fairly small school, although it is a public school. Our students have lots of opportunities to engage in experiential learning, whether it be through one of our 8 clinics that we have here, or through our public service externship opportunities that we have, whether it be with federal courts, state courts, federal agencies, and things of that sort, or whether it be through one of our fellowships that we have available to them, and of course, the clerkships that come from our career services office. I think a really unique thing that I should probably mention, which is the newest addition to our institution here, is our Center for Racial Justice and Criminal Justice Reform. One of the things that we are doing with that center is building a pipeline to law school, of course, for the Central Arkansas and the greater Arkansas area, but really just for the legal community at large. And one of our missions, one of our goals is to use that center as a way of bringing in more diverse students, engaging with them and preparing them for the LSAT by teaching them the skills that they need to overcome the LSAT and do those great things. Of course, that's one of the hard skills, one of the hard things that we're not talking about today, but also giving them an opportunity to come to the campus to meet with myself, meet with some of the students here, and develop a relationship with my office and my colleagues and the students here so that they can prepare for law school. And so with that, I think, my colleagues before me have said a lot of great things. Of course, I won't repeat what they said. I will repeat the one thing, though. I think that the last thing that Lauren said was more so along the lines of qualitative versus quantitative. I think that's really just the summation of what soft skills are. But I also do want to sort of highlight a little bit of some of what soft skills can be. And so I think April mentioned leaving no stone unturned. And so when you're completing your applications, you want to make sure that you are not submitting, the first draft of your personal statement, things like that. Attention to detail. when you are communicating with people in the admissions office, you want to be sure that you're leaving a good taste in their mouth. So how you're communicating with them, the types of questions that you're asking them, the way that you're drafting your emails to them, the way you're conversing with them over the phone, the way you are introducing yourself to them when you meet them on the road or when you visit them at the office. Those things are some of the things that we can classify and consider as soft skills. So it's not just about, you have the high GPA or you have the LSAT score, but it's also about how you present yourself in person, how you present yourself in conversation, but also how you represent yourself in your application. So are you making sure that you have totally edited, your application? Are you making sure that it is your best foot coming forward? Or are you just filling out the application at like 10 minutes to the deadline and hoping that you spelled all the words right? You want to be sure that you're taking time to go over those things and make sure that you are presenting the best version of yourself.
Thank you so much. I'm glad that you highlighted those other things, which is when you see law school admissions people in person and how to act. Very true. Okay, let's go to Dean Mensah and an introduction to the University of Houston.
Thank you so much. My name is Pilar Mensah. I'm the Dean of Admissions at the University of Houston Law Center, which is obviously located in Houston. We are also just south of downtown, actually very close to Thurgood Marshall School of Law. We are a public, so Texas State institution. We actually right now are in a very old building, but I'm excited to start sharing with incoming students that we are currently in construction for a new law school building, which will be done in time for fall 2022. Hopefully we'll be moving in there in May of next year. So it'll definitely be up and running and ready for all the new students. So I'm really excited. It's supposed to be, it's beautiful state-of-the-art building with lots of open space and windows, which we don't have right now. Actually, our offices are located underground at the moment. So very excited to have a window and a view. Some other things that I think are just interesting about University of Houston that are maybe a little bit different from other law schools is that we do have both a full-time program and a part-time program. So if students are interested in going to school full-time, we have that day program for them as usual. But if you are needing to work while you're in law school, the part-time program is in the evening exclusively the first year. So you would take, you'd be able to work during the day, a full-time position if you wanted to, and then take your classes in the evening. They're usually Monday through Thursday from about 6 to 9 p.m. So that's kind of unique. And I think it really does help the working demographic that's interested in going to law school. It gives them that option without having to walk away from their careers. And you'll find that most of the students in that program are typically have been working for a little while and may have families or children or spouses. So just walking away from a job is not really an option. Also, something new at University of Houston is that we are starting to accept the GRE. So this is the first admission cycle where we're accepting that. So that'll be interesting to see how many students are applying with the GRE this year. One of the great things I think about University of Houston is that we have a very broad course offering. So I think that no matter what your interests are, you'll be able to find your niche. You'll be able to take classes, both, just regular doctrinal electoral type of courses, but then also the hands-on experiential courses that fit your area, whatever interest that is. Our course offering is broad enough that we do also offer a joint JD LLM. And we have several different LLMs. So it just, again, depending on your interest. But with that joint JD LLM, you're able to earn your LLM with one additional semester of study. So that's kind of cool. You just have to make sure you apply for the LLM and decide you want to be a part of it before you actually graduate. Because then once you graduate, it's not a joint anymore. And then the other thing I think that's great about Houston is the support you'll find here. So hopefully, if you decide to apply or interact with admissions, you'll start seeing the experience you would have working with the staff in the law center. Once you become a student at the University of Houston, we have support in place with student mentors, faculty mentors. Of course, your professors are always available to you in office hours. But then we also do have TAs in all the first year classes. So TAs are upper division 2Ls or 3L students that took the class as a first year, did well, And now they actually do attend all your first year courses with you, and they'll do tutoring sessions with you. And all of that is just to try to help you find support and be successful, particularly in your first year when it really is a challenge and you're learning, how to study and how to read and prepare for classes. Our student services office is great, and we have a really large career development office. So when you come into the University of Houston, you'll be assigned a career counselor that you can start working with, and you can stay with that career counselor your entire 3 to 4 years. I forgot to mention the part-time program is a 4-year program, full-time is a 3-year. And so being in Houston, I think that's added value as well. There's a lot of employment opportunities. We're close to downtown, we're close to the medical center. So finding internships in the summer is something that career development will help you with. And then of course, trying to help you secure employment after you graduate. A lot of our students do stay in the Houston area or the Texas area. A lot of our students are from Texas. In terms of the soft spots with the application, I feel like so much great advice has already been shared. I'll say think about 2 things. One is as you're piecing everything together, aside from your LSAT and your GPA, but your resume, your personal statement, and then you're thinking about who can write your letters of recommendation. It's kind of, I know as you work on it, you're going to be working on it separately, but before you submit your application, they'll really take a step back and look at everything and try to make the determination if this is really a comprehensive review of who you are, and that each component of the application adds value. So, you don't want to be repeating yourselves on all these different components. You want to utilize the space and utilize these different documents to share as much about you as possible. So again, making sure that each one adds value and is telling us a little bit something different about yourself and is not redundant or repetitive. Particularly if you decide to write an addendum, let's say there's something you want to explain. If you've already addressed it in the personal statement, maybe you don't need to write an addendum. Or maybe there's something you really do want the admissions committee to know that doesn't make sense to put in your personal statement. So then an addenda is a great place to do that. Also, kind of touching on addendums, I would say my other advice would be when you step back and you look at all the different components, make sure there's nothing odd, there's no questions that the admissions committee may not understand on face value of what you've submitted. You don't want admissions committees guessing what was going on or what was happening. You want to tell them, because they'll probably come up with some crazier story than what was really going on in your life. So again, leave no questions for the admissions committee. You don't want to leave blanks that they're trying to fill in, basically. So that's my advice on that. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, so that brings us to Ms. Stovall from SMU. Heather, tell us about it.
Absolutely. So we're located just outside of Dallas, about 5 minutes out of downtown. We have our class size, incoming class size is normally around 210 to 220 students. And we have a very supportive family style environment. That's between your classmates, your staff, your faculty, and even our alumni network. We have alumni all over the country, even the world, who stay very involved. And that's something that we encourage of our incoming class so that continues on for our alumni once they graduate. We have 3 different externship programs: a federal judicial externship, a government and nonprofit externship, and a corporate counsel externship. We also have 11 clinics. They range from things like tax clinic to an innocence initiative that's become pretty popular in the last few years. Domestic violence, small business clinic. If you've got more questions about those too, I'm sure myself and my colleagues will be happy to answer those kind of at the end after we go through all of the soft factors. If you guys have questions you'd like to ask in the chat. And a lot of things have already been said about the soft factors, and some of the things that have already been said, I again don't want to repeat like some of my other colleagues. Some of the notes that I had jotted down before was, it really, they do tell us who you are on a deeper level than your GRE and your LSAT. And as I mentioned, your LSAT and your GPA or GRE, because we also accept the GRE. And for us, like I said, that's really important because we are trying to put a supportive class together. We are really focused on making sure that our students work hard to encourage one another to do well, to succeed, to get jobs after they graduate. So these things like your soft factors are what tell us those things. We don't get that from your LSAT score or your GPA. Those are just, you know, the numeric portion, still very important. But your soft factors are also important. So one of the things that I always encourage students to do, if you're a senior, you might, and you're applying now, this might not be super helpful for you, but if you're earlier on in your undergraduate journey, one of the things that I always encourage you to do when I get asked questions like, what should I be involved with? Do things that you love doing. They don't have to be pre-law related. I think that's where a lot of students get stuck. Oh, I have to be a poli-sci major. I have to intern with a judge. I have to work at a law firm. You don't have to do any of those things to apply to law school. Instead, do things that you enjoy doing. Those are the things that come across to us that tell us, you know, who you are outside of wanting to be a lawyer. And really nothing that you're doing now during undergrad is going to help you prepare for law school anyway. That's what your first year is for. So instead, I do encourage you to do those things that you love doing. Get involved with whatever it is that you want to be involved with. I think that's one of the great things about law school is everybody has such a different background. You know, you could be an opera singer, you could be a chef, you could enjoy riding horses, doing race car stuff on weekends, just whatever it is, whatever involvement it is that you enjoy doing, make sure that that's what your focus is. Because that again is what comes across through us, you know, is who is this person? And that's what answers that question whenever we're going through your application.
You know, that is so fantastic because Heather just totally segued to what my next question or next conversation is going to be about, and that's about resumes. And so I want to start off with that question that Ms. Stovall was just addressing is, what should I be doing during law school during undergraduate, besides my academics? Should I be working? Should I be volunteering, organizations and so forth? Lauren, why don't you're first up on my camera. So that's, I think I'm going to call on you first.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at a resume, we really just want to get a better idea of your involvement. You know, we want to see what are your interests, what are your skills, what have you achieved thus far. We want students that want to be not just only leaders, but are also you know, take the initiative, that are you know, being proactive, whether it's an involvement in an organization or you know, taking a leadership role in that organization, whether it's you know, being involved in their community somehow by volunteering. We just want to see how you are, you know, advancing yourselves academically, professionally, but also how you're helping your local community, whether it's at your university, outside of school. Your resume really just gives us that kind of snapshot.
Thank you. Dean Obu, what would you add to what kinds of activities, work, interests do you like to see on a resume?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I think just to start off by saying that sometimes college students feel like when they hear the word resume, they feel like, oh gosh, it has to be 2 pages and it has to, you know, have all these jobs and all these things and on and on and on like that. It doesn't necessarily have to. We realize that you are just coming out of college, depending on you know, what life has presented you with. You may not have had an opportunity to have a job or things like that, but you can highlight even the courses that you've taken and what you've learned from those courses, special projects that you've done in those courses that have sort of taken you a little deeper into understanding what it is you want to do with your law degree or what it is you want to do with your major. You can talk about any kind of merits you've received, any kind of awards, honors, things of that sort, any kind of volunteer service that you engaged in. That may be something that you want to include on your resume as well. You may even just want to talk about, as it's been mentioned before, your skills or any kind of personal projects that you're working on yourself to develop your skills. But really, I think it's been said before, you want to do things that you enjoy doing. we want to see a well-rounded person. So yes, we want to see someone who is demonstrating a seriousness of purpose about going to law school, but we also want to see someone who's thinking beyond law school. You know, what else are you interested in? What else do you have going on for you? What else do you like to do? You know, so it's important to make sure that your resume is well-rounded. It's giving us a picture of who you are as a student, but also who you are as a person.
Thank you. April, let's add on to that, especially when it comes to organizations. I know sometimes students come to me with this long list of organizations they're in, but nothing really more than that. You know, what is your view of organizations?
Well, I think they're great if you have time to balance them and your schoolwork. So here's the thing about all of those wonderful involvements. You know, don't overstress yourself to join as much as you can at the expense of your GPA. Okay, just remember that there is no pressure to stuff as much into that resume as you can if doing so is harming you in another way. And I'll just kind of be, I don't know if I should, I will just say this too. Sometimes, depending on the way the application is laid out, you may be able to get a lot of this on the application. You know, remember that as well. I'll just tell you all a little story. I grew up on a farm. I'm from a rural community. I'm the first in my family to go to college. I didn't have much to go on my resume, and I felt really bad about that when I applied to law school, because I thought, what do I put down? You know, that I worked, I canned all summer and we sold our stuff at the farmer's market. I mean, is that important to put on the so I felt there was a deficit there. And so I just want to encourage you guys that, if you don't feel like the resume is helpful, then you don't have to include it. It's totally optional. But if you have, if the application itself really doesn't give you enough room on there to get your point across of all the wonderful things you've done, then yeah, you definitely need to include that resume. So, when you think about the resume, ask yourself, like, what does a lawyer even do? And what does a law student do? Well, they write a lot. They engage in Socratic method in class. They work a lot, at their studies. They have to be committed. They engage in leadership opportunity with internships and taking initiative, I believe, one of my other. So when you think about all of those things that you will be doing as a law student and a lawyer, then that sort of is what could guide you into how you're crafting your personal statement. Personal statement resume is what we're talking about. So just kind of have that in the back of your mind. I do think student organizations are great. I for one, enjoy reading about what you guys are doing. I like to see those things, but I just wanted to take a moment to tell you that it's not a marathon. And I would only do as what Heather, I think, was saying, Dean Stovall was saying earlier, do the things that you enjoy, and just run with that, if you're, and be sure on your resume to include, if you held an officer position, include that on your resume. If you were the, philanthropy chair, include that. Include the things that you're doing within those organizations. I think that's really important. And again, don't try to feel like you have to fit into a mold when you're putting that resume or that application together, because you do you and you'll be fine, but don't overdo it to the point where you have damaged your GPA, because I could have easily done that in college and in law school, let's be honest. It's very easy to get over involved to the point. So have a healthy balance, pick some things that you're passionate about at undergraduate school, highlight it where appropriate, and then keep an eye on your GPA too, because that's going to help you with not only admission, but scholarship. And I would like to add also just some, is it okay if I just elaborate on that a little bit, Barbara? I know everybody's taking a turn, but I just wanted to
Very well.
also, thank you. I just wanted to also throw in that when you're putting your resume together, remember that every single document that you're including in your application is saying something about you as an applicant. So are you a professional person? Are you mature? These are things that are important as you're applying to law school. So, when you're putting that resume together, I would honestly, maybe think about skipping out on some of those emojis and icons and graphics. We see a lot of that, guys. We see a lot of that in resumes here recently this year I've seen. And to be honest, it's so busy. It's so busy on the resume that the good stuff that you really want to highlight gets kind of lost in all of that. So, and so I love creativity. I'm an artist at heart, but I'm just saying, when it comes to that resume, kind of keep it simple, put everything in there that's important, but skip some of that other, like I said, emojis, graphics, pictures, all of that. Also, I would say, make your resume organized in a way that's easy for your reviewers to find out what they're looking for, so they can quickly look at it and see why you're a good fit for their program. That, you just want to make that easy for them, because your reviewers, they're reading hundreds and hundreds of these. So you want to make it easy for them to get to the good stuff, right? So, and then also use an easy to read font. Can't stress that enough. And limit, I'd say 1 to 2 pages is appropriate. Be consistent with your punctuation. So I am terrible at this. When I use bullets, sometimes I use a period at the end of the item. Sometimes I don't. Just be consistent with that. Don't let it be a mix of that. Either use them or don't use them. And I think that when you're putting like your leadership or your employment experiences on your resume, lead with action words. You know what I mean? How do you say that? So it's like, I led this, mentored that, put your action items on there, like what you accomplished at that internship or at that job, so that it really highlights those quantifiable results. Like, I increased sales by blah, 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 or, start each bullet point again with an action word like led, mentored, organized. Does that make sense? I hope so.
And I'm going to go over to Miguel for this question. It's something that is in this discussion that's come up in the chat here too, that I always get with my students: 1 page or 2 page. And if you're writing 2 pages, what is it that's different about a law school resume? Because our business students always try to cram everything onto 1 page in 7-point font. And I just tell them, the law school people will not like this. So yeah. What do you say on that, Miguel?
Good question. I think the idea is to, you have to do a little bit of introspection. You got to do some self-examination. It's okay to get the stuff on a couple of pages. Look at 5 pages if you have to, and, decide for yourself which of the things are most important to you to demonstrate. Now, there are elements of resumes that, we would call the effervescent word listy, right? So there's a lot of listy things out there. So, try to consider where the substance is. I think if you can consider the substance and be economical with it, that is, like, for example, you go to a nice restaurant, you get a plate, they know exactly how much to put on the plate, right? And it looks really good. And when you're done, you're not stuffed, you're full, and it's good. So consider those things when you're putting together a resume, because it's not just a resume, it's everything else that encompasses your application. So every piece of your application is an element that should complement the next. So I think that's an important thing to consider. So if it's over the course of 2 pages, fine. Just make sure it's 2 substantive pages, right? Not 2 listy pages.
Thank you. And I want to ask Heather about that, because I saw you like nodding your head quite aggressively when we were talking about no 7-point font.
I am nodding, and I want to add to each law school has different requirements, right? So some schools it might be optional, some schools it may be not. Some schools you might have, and some of my colleagues, not on this panel today, but at some other law schools have shared that they have page limits. So you might have like a 2-page limit or a 1-page limit, and they'll stop reading like after you get to that certain page. So I think that's where it's very important that you read the instructions, make sure that you're following any sort of instructions. That's why I'm nodding my head. Some law schools that might have font limits. You know, when we're reading applications too, most of us, I think, have all gone digital for the most part. We don't print things out anymore. We read it on a screen. So when you have 6.7 and 7.5 font and you're using some sort of font that's difficult to read and it's running to the edge of the page and you don't have margins, you know, we start going cross-eyed. We read thousands and thousands of applications each cycle. So make sure that what you're submitting is professional. And to also add on to what Dean Fox said, you know, the last couple of years, especially, I've seen more and more resumes that have your pictures. You know, we don't need those. You don't need to put your goal at the top of your resume like you would for a job. We know what your goal is. It's to come to law school. You don't need to put reference information on there. You don't need to put references available on request. That information will come to us through your letters of recommendation. So there are definitely things that you want to think about not including on there. And one of those also goes to a question that I saw in the chat, which I can't tell who just answered it, but just in case some of you aren't keeping up with the chat, you don't need to include things you did in high school unless there's like a special circumstance that if you had a job in high school and it continued on during college and like I said, you've just got experience during that, then absolutely include that. Tell us what you did. Something Dean Fox said actually stood out to me too, where she was just talking about her personal resume and she was a little bit stressed that it wasn't so long because she was working and canning and doing things like that on the farm. Tell us that. Like, you're not oversharing. Just don't make them paragraphs, but put a little bullet that says worked full-time on family farm throughout undergraduate. You know, we don't know that. You can list your job, but we don't know that you work full-time to put yourself through college unless you're sharing things like that. So like I said, if that's something that she did from high school through college, then you would definitely want to include that information from high school. But if it's an award you won, if it was an organization you were only a member of in high school, or a job you only had in high school, that got you into your undergraduate institution. You don't need to include that also on your law school application as well.
Thank you. And Dean Mensa, I once again, I got a little segue from Heather and I are all, you know, we're both comets, so we're both on the same page. I always have students who come to me and say, I didn't have a chance to be in organizations because I was working during undergraduate. And then I have students come to me and say, I haven't had a chance to all I've got is organizations. I haven't had a job. Will you address how it is that the law schools view the person who has had to work during school but doesn't have the extracurriculars, and then the opposite?
That's really funny you're asking me that question, because that was the only thing I could think to add, was talking about that in terms of the resume, because everybody else has covered everything else. And so my advice to students is, we do look at that. We do take that in consideration as admission professionals when we're reading your resume. If you have worked, you know, especially if you're working like a full-time position while you're an undergrad, of course, we're not going to expect to see a lot of student organizations. That wouldn't really be fair. And it goes back to what Dean Fox was talking about in terms of not wanting to not overexert yourself, but, you know, get involved in too many things to the detriment of your undergraduate GPA, which, you know, is that it's very important. We're talking about the soft spots, the other things that are, but we don't want you to do anything that's going to be to the detriment of that, because your GPA is going to be something that's important to the admissions committee. So I would say too, if you worked full time while you were in college, that may be something you also want to highlight on your resume. Maybe you can put a little notation that says, you were working 40 hours a week or 30 hours a week. So we know that this wasn't just a 5 to 10 hour part-time job. This was really everything you were doing outside of school. You were somehow able to balance, your studies, going to classes, and working full time. And then I would say for the opposite student, I think that those student organizations can be just as telling and just as valuable as work experience. Particularly if you were involved in student organizations and you held leadership positions. Some of these leadership positions come with a lot of responsibility for the other members of the organization, possibly for finances as you hosted events and did different things on campus. So really play up, what you did for those student organizations, what you learned from them, how it assisted other members, how it assists the school. I think you can really show a lot of experience from those organizations as well. It doesn't have to be paid for it to be meaningful.
Thank you. I feel like I keep muting and unmuting myself. That's the late afternoon. I think we've pretty well addressed a lot about resumes. Is there anything anyone else on the panel would like to make any final point about?
Yeah.
Oh.
Go ahead, Miguel.
I think that there's no one type of student that fits in a box, and there's no category that everybody fits in. Everybody has an ability to have their own experience. I was working through high school and I was working through college, and I had no room for anything else, but I was grinding. But I did that pretty consistently. And I think those are the things that you can carry forward to wherever it is that you're going to. That level of consistency. And if you can look at somebody who worked at McDonald's having value in an MBA program, if that person could see the value, the point of sale, customer service, running a franchise, those pieces, if you can see those things, it adds value to your experience. But if you don't see them, it's hard for us to see them. You see, and we want to know that you can see those things. That's all.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. So let's, yes, go ahead, April.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to add that, my little story earlier about myself was just to emphasize that sometimes when you hear this discussion about the resume, if you feel like you don't have as much to put on a resume, it can seem super intimidating, because that's sort of how I felt when I applied, anything when I was younger. But I just that's why I shared it. It's not that I was discouraging. I hope you guys didn't take it that way, that I was saying don't do the resume. It's just that just do you, and if that's, there's no judgment, like it's like comparing apples to oranges. Law schools are working with applicants where they find them, and everybody is at different stages in life. They have different life experiences. And so it's all good. And I see a conversation happening over in the chat about non-traditional students. We see all of that in the application. And so it's very understandable that, some applicants will come to the table with a lot of involvement in school, but maybe they were not a single parent supporting a child at the time. And there's certainly some grace that goes along with that. When you see that, that doesn't mean a school would judge harshly someone who, is involved in those activities, but maybe not as much employment. It's just like, I just want to tell you guys, we're really not thinking that in depth about it. It's just, we're just soaking it all up like a sponge, whatever it is you want to give us, and it's more about just getting to know you as a person. So there's not like this prescribed, you have to have this many organizations listed and you need to have done this many internships and had this many jobs. It's less about that than what sometimes I think applicants want to think. So
And I think that's a good segue to talking about personal statements. Of course, I can give an hour and a half long seminar about personal statements and still not cover everything. So, if we can all just kind of give some overviews and insights about, how you view the personal statement. Dean Obu?
Yes, personal statements. They are one of my favorite parts of the application because it gives us insight to who the applicant is through the voice of the applicant. Touching on the letters of recommendation just a little bit, I tell people when I counsel them that the letters of recommendation, that's our opportunity to get to know who they are through the voice of someone else. Whereas, the grades are a chance for us to get to know them through the voice of their professors. But the personal statement, that's really the applicant's opportunity to advocate for themselves, to let us know why it is they're interested in our school, what kind of program, what kind of clerkships or externships or clinics or concurrent degree programs they're interested in, what it is about us that really speaks to them, that really has drawn them to us. And it really is, I think, the applicant's way of sort of putting a nice little pretty bow on the application, with the grades and all these other things, but staying for themselves. This is who I am. You've heard from all these other people. Let me tell you a little bit more about me. Get to know me through me. And so I think the personal statement, of course, it's a part of the application that I think gives a lot of people a lot of anxiety. But I think if you really take time to really, as someone said before, I think it was Miguel, introspection, ask yourself the questions: why do I want to go to law school? Why do I want to go to this law school? How do I see myself being useful to the legal community here in this state, to the legal community at large? What are my hopes and dreams? And how will obtaining a legal degree help me get to that goal? It's not just about, I think sometimes people get caught up in wanting to sound like Abraham Lincoln or Barack Obama or whoever else they know to be Atticus Finch. I don't know. They just want to sound like those people, and then they lose their own voice, trying to draft these well-written, verbose personal statements. And as it's been said numerous times before, we just want to get to know you. So of course, it doesn't mean, as I mentioned before, you just upload the first draft of your personal statement. You want to give it the time and the attention that it needs, because this is you speaking for yourself. And law school is about advocacy and advocating for others. And so this is your chance to demonstrate that you have some level of ability to advocate for yourself. So it's really important for you to take time to, think about your personal statement, think about what it is you want to include in there. Think about also what it is you want to exclude from that. And something I did when I was applying to law school was, give my personal statement to people I really trusted, who were good with English, but were also in a professional or graduate program of their own. So they've gone through some sort of admissions process, and they were able to pretty much dissect it and, encourage me to think about, have you considered adding this part about who you are? Have you considered this quality of who you are? I think you really should include that. And opening yourself up to not really criticism, but having that be improved, I think will be a great way for you to improve your personal statement.
Thank you. Very good advice. Ms. Fideli, we haven't heard from you in a little bit. I want to hear about what your view is. You're sitting in front of all those applications. What really makes you excited when you see a good personal statement? What characteristics does it have?
Yeah, I mean, really just to build off of what was just said, it's not only a personal statement, it's not only us getting to hear an applicant's voice really for the first time, it's also, really, you could kind of see it as like your sales tool, right? It's your opportunity to kind of pitch yourself, sell yourself to our admissions committee. It's your opportunity to start that dialogue with our admissions committee to let us know not just who you are, but like what was said, like what have you overcome? What obstacles have you that you've conquered or faced, what has inspired you to even become a lawyer or want to go to law school. What are your goals? You know, we want to get to know more about you as a person. We want to feel, you know, enticed. Whenever I get the feeling like, "Ooh, I wish I could read more," that's a good feeling when you're reading an application. You know, we want to, of course, you know, help students achieve their goals, but we need to know what they are in the first place. We need to know who you are. So your personal statement is really your opportunity to advocate for yourself, to sell yourself, to really start that dialogue with our admissions committee. I will also say that I concur and wholeheartedly agree that you should have your personal statement reviewed by someone that you trust. You know, just like myself, whenever I'm writing, you know, sometimes it's hard to edit your own work. So it's good to have a fresh set of eyes. Look at your personal statement, not only just for content, but also for grammar and spelling. We are not sticklers for grammar and spelling, but your personal statement is essentially a writing sample in and of itself to us. And as a law student, you will be doing lots of writing. So it does kind of give us a little insight of your writing ability, as well as, you know, insight on who you are as a person. So, you know, taking the time to craft it, but also get it edited, not just for content, but for spelling, grammar, is important as well.
So I'm going to ask you this, and then I'm going to ask both Heather and Pilar same question and let them elaborate. Your school's personal statement, do you have a page limit, and do you have any particular prompt?
We do not have a prompt, and we do not have a page limit. With that being said, I would advise probably 1 to 3 pages long, but there is no limit.
Okay, great. Pilar, tell us about University of Houston. Page
We
limit?
don't really yeah, we really don't have a prompt either. We do ask why you're interested in Houston specifically. And then in terms of a page limit, we say 2 to 3 pages, double spaced.
And anything in particular, any particular tip you have?
Oh, yes. Okay. So as was mentioned, it is like an interview on paper. Most law schools don't have any sort of face-to-face interviews. And so just like you would in a face-to-face interview, my recommendation is to remain positive in your personal statement, wanting to present your, you know, your best self, your best foot forward. Of course, that may be a little bit different if you're talking about a hardship that you've overcome, but you definitely still want to turn it around in terms of like what you learned from that experience and how you've taken that experience and, you know, turned it into a positive, or you've learned from it and how you're moving forward with it. I know that it can be difficult to advocate for yourself. It can be difficult to talk about yourself and not feel as if you are maybe bragging or boasting. But we really do want to hear the best of you. And so one tip someone told me once is maybe in your first draft or two, write it in the third person, write it as if you're writing about somebody else. And maybe it'll make it a little bit easier for you to really talk about yourself. And then utilizing others, of course, for grammar and those kinds of things. But also if you're stuck and you're having a hard time figuring out what you should write about, it may be helpful to talk to some people that know you well, that may remind you of some of the accomplishments, some of the experiences that you've had, your motivations, because, you know, a lot of law school applicants are overachievers and they've done a lot of things and they kind of forget some of the amazing things that they've done, you know, over their lifetime. And so I think, you know, talking to others may be helpful, you know, brainstorming, writing down ideas, and you may find there are some themes that you can write about from your experiences and maybe jobs and things that you've had. And then I also think it's great to make sure you give yourself plenty of time to write it. This is not something you write in one day or even 1 week. You know, write a draft, take a break from it for a few days, come back, look at it again, talk to some other people, take a break from it again. And I also think when you're talking about letting other people read it, it may be helpful to have someone read it that doesn't know you well at all, actually, because that's more representative of what the admissions committee is, right? We don't know you at all. And so have someone that doesn't know you well read it and make sure they understand what you're trying to convey and who you are, because they may be confused about something, and they'll help you edit your personal statement so that we don't feel that way as the admissions committee. But yeah, give yourself plenty of time. You will spend a lot of time on this personal statement. You will write many drafts. And I would say, unfortunately, you may have to make more than one personal statement for your different law schools, depending on the page limitations, depending on whether or not there are prompts. So make sure that you are following the instructions for each school and you're writing the appropriate personal statement. Sometimes students will indicate within their personal statement the law school that they're applying to, right? So they may say, University of Houston is my first choice. This is where I really want to go. If you decide to do things like that, you need to be really careful that you're sending the right personal statement to the right school, because every year we get personal statements from students talking about a school being their first choice, and it's not us. So be really careful of that. Maybe even if you're writing different drafts for different schools, as you're saving them and working on them, entitle them the name of the school, and that will help you. So when you go to submit it, you submit the right one to the right school. Because I would say that's a big mistake when we get personal statements for another school. Big mistake. You don't want to do that.
And every time I'm on with law school admissions people, everyone say that. And it just astonishes me that you all still get personal statements with the wrong school written on it.
Or
Yeah.
maybe just don't write a school at all.
Yeah, that's right. Just keep it
Keep it general.
maybe so. Yeah. And I will put in a pitch right now for pre-law advisors. It seems to be a good time for a commercial. If you have a pre-law advisor at your school, there's absolutely no reason to go it alone. I review personal statements every day, and I can let you know what my law school admissions friends are looking for. So, okay, Heather, do you all have a page limit? And I think it'd be good to tell us about the why SMU statement too.
Yes. So we do not have a page limit. Instead, we see kind of an average. Our personal statements, we normally see about 2 to 3 pages. If it spills over onto 4, that's completely fine as well. We do not have a specific prompt. I kind of call it the tell us why you're amazing and what you're going to add to our incoming class question. But that's pretty much what our prompt kind of is summarized to. We do have a specific another required piece that is called the why SMU statement. It's normally about page and a half that students just tell us why they're interested in coming to SMU. They sometimes overthink it. I think they feel like they have to go online and regurgitate clinic names, professor names, programs back to us. And it could be as easy as, my family lives in Dallas, I want to stay in Dallas, or I moved somewhere for undergraduate and I want to come back. I met this lawyer, they said you'll have a great alumni network. You don't have to overthink your YSMU statement. And then one of the things that I always kind of encourage students to do when you're having your pre-law advisors read your personal statement as well, which I know can be uncomfortable. I know you could be sharing things that are personal, and that's why it's called your personal statement, but look at it as kind of a first step in becoming an attorney too, because you're going to feel uncomfortable in your law school classes. You're also going to feel uncomfortable when you're practicing law. You know, you get questioned by the judge, you get questioned by your opposing counsel. And for a long time, 4 to 5 years is normally what they tell you will take you to settle in to practicing law. You're just going to have to put yourself out there in order to get where your end goal is of being a successful attorney. So look at it that way, that this is like first step and it's a great opportunity to do. So this is something I share with students and something I share with pre-law advisors. If you're telling our admissions committee about a person that impacted you, that made you change your mind on the way you looked at something, inspired you to want to do something, or any sort of situation that happened to you in your life, make sure that you're not spending your entire personal statement telling us about that other person or that situation that happened. I think that's a little bit of a trap that students fall into. You know, if you volunteered with a student who you were in college, they were in high school, You helped them apply to colleges. They'd never had a family member graduate from high school. It was inspiring to you to get to see them go through this whole process. You probably just wrote a great personal statement for that student that he or she could use for college, their college application. So, but it doesn't tell us a whole lot about you and how it impacted you. So I encourage students, try to keep those stories about other people, about the scenario, the situation that you're writing about, maybe to like half a page, 3/4 of a page at max on your personal statement, and then really delve into how it did impact you, how it inspired you to do this or do that. So again, make sure, and I know again that this is uncomfortable, always writing and having to write about yourself, but it should always go back to you. So that's kind of how I encourage students to look at your personal statement whenever you're going through that editing process.
Excellent, thank you. Dean Hernandez, I'm going to use you to segue to our topic from personal statements to other addenda, like diversity statements and any other additional addenda that the application might ask for. And by the way, you can, if there's anything you want to add on first about your view of personal statements, please do. And then let's talk about various addenda.
Okay, just real quick on the personal statement. I think one of the techniques that I saw used that actually just was pretty useful to the students that have used this is to, once you discover what it is or your reason for going to law school, take your voice recorder on your phone in a moment of peace and clarity and ask yourself why you want to go to law school, and record yourself saying that and transcribe it. And the gold is in there somewhere, you know. Many drafts, you know, have Word read your document back to you, so we don't have to hear your grammar mistakes. We do expect a high level of professionalism because you're about to enter a professional program. So where's the sauce, people? You know, that kind of thing, right? So I think that's important. We have that expectation. We expect that of you, just like we would expect that of anybody else. And it's really important that you do the best you can to deliver there. So let's get on to the part about the addenda. The personal statement is kind of the spit and polish, and the addenda is the color, right? So if you have a coloring book, the addenda is opportunity to be able to color in the things that we need more information on. So for example, if you're looking at your application and for yourself, right? Just look at it for yourself objectively as you can. And if you see that your grade trend looks like a heart monitor, you know, if you see that happening, you know, just explain it. It's not, it just tell it, because we're gonna question it. I think somebody mentioned it a little while earlier that, you know, we can speculate all we want because we've seen the best and the worst, but you don't want us to speculate, because if we speculate, we can go to different places. You don't want that. So bring us back down to earth, express what it is, and put it in the addenda. So if you had some challenges in your academic experience, even if it was in your first part of your academic experience, first 2 years, that you were really struggling because you were away from home, whatever it was, explain it. You know, it's okay to put it out there because we've all been in different places like that. So it's okay for you to tell us about those things. Here's a person with the character enough to be able to express that personal element very clearly and concisely, but they got it. It registered on the back end of their experience, upward grade trend, really strong. So for those of you in your senior year, upward grade trend, very strong.
Very good. I noticed that Dean Obu, you wrote a note about Bowen's personal statement, and it's interesting. If you would address it, it has a prompt, and so tell us about, you know, what you're looking for in that prompt and how important it is to answer the question you've been asked, right?
That's a good question. So as I mentioned earlier in another note that I listed there, I think it's really important to demonstrate to the different law schools that you're applying to your ability to read instructions and follow instructions. You know, lets us know that when you can read and that you can understand what you're doing after you've read. And so, you know, with the prompt, it's sort of, you know, on purpose. We want to see, did you actually pay attention? And kind of going back to what I think Dean Menta said about, not, sending Temple Tulsa's personal statement or something along those lines. You want to make sure that you're not sending Temple Tulsa's prompt or, not specifically Tulsa, but you're not sending one law school a personal statement that they sort of kind of didn't really ask for. If there is a prompt there, it really is with a purpose in mind. They want to know, are you committed to their core values? They want to know, can you fit in our community? Are you about what we're about? Do these things drive you? Do you have a passion for what we have a passion for? And how do you see yourself sort of fulfilling our core values as a student here and also in your legal profession after you graduated? So that's really kind of what we're looking for. We're not looking for people, who've gone and, dug ditches in wherever. And if you've done that, that's great. That's a good way to demonstrate some of those things. But we want to sort of get applicants thinking about, these core values, what are they and how can I incorporate them into my legal studies and into my legal profession once I'm done with my education.
So at Arkansas Little Rock, what addenda do you all have that are available, and what kind of responses are you looking to see?
Sure. So, of course, as mentioned before, the character and fitness, that's important, particularly if there are things that an applicant should disclose. It is very important that you disclose those things honestly, and on the front end. I think it's always better for an applicant to disclose it voluntarily, willingly, without having to be prompted. And what I mean by having to be prompted is that we find out there's an issue somewhere in the application, and an applicant just doesn't even talk about it. They just kind of gloss over it, something along those lines. And then we have to reach out to them, email them, call them, or maybe even do a Google search to find out what in the world happened there, and then ask for a disclosure. That kind of leaves a bad taste in the mouth. It makes us wonder what you're trying to hide. And as was mentioned before, you don't want to leave us to our own assumptions. You want to be straightforward in explaining things. So of course there's that. We also do have the diversity statement. And really what we're looking for there is just an opportunity for applicants to tell us how they think they can contribute to the diversity of our school, how they think they can enhance it, and their background, how they think their diverse background can influence our community here, can influence the class that they want to become a part of. We also have an adversity statement. And so the difference between the two, sometimes people come to me and they say, I don't think I'm diverse. There's nothing diverse about me. And so with that, my response is, well, you've probably faced some sort of adversity in your life. And so the adversity statement is just an opportunity for applicants to tell us about any kind of adverse situations they've gone through in the past and how they've developed, some soft skills and other skills, things of that sort, and how they think those skills will be beneficial to them in their legal education and beyond.
Very good. Adversity statement. I like that. That's very good. Okay, so I'm going to throw out a question, and any panel member, you all can jump in and see if you want to answer this. I had a student ask me, so I said something about, my diverse background in my personal statement. Should I write a diversity statement as well, or should I leave it out? And how do the law schools view it if I don't write a diversity statement? Anybody? Heather, go ahead.
So if it's repetitive, then no, you don't need to write a separate diversity statement. If you feel like you have answered whatever the school is asking in the diversity statement within your personal statement, you don't need to stress out and rewrite it again. If it's different, then yes. If you feel like you need to elaborate more on whatever it is that you kind of briefly touched on in your personal statement, then absolutely write it again. And if you don't write the diversity statement, I don't think any of my colleagues, I can't speak for them, so they can hop on it for sure and say so, but I don't think we look at it as a negative. Most of the time we understand that you probably touched on something in your personal statement Or if you're stretching and you really don't have anything to write about, we also can tell that you were stressing out about it. You were making it a stretch. And it is, at least for us at SMU, it is optional for a reason, because you don't have to submit it. So it's not, if you don't have anything, or like I said, you've already touched on it, then you don't need to worry about kind of rewriting something again for us.
Anyone else want to jump in on that one?
Yeah, anything that's required is really the important piece. Again, looking at the instructions. Now, here's the trick. We know that the instructions for every law school are very long. We know they're very long, but it requires your attention. It does. If you're going to put together a good application, it requires your attention, because you best bet that your teacher will require your attention to detail when you're reading your books. So exercise that attention to detail now.
Yeah, excellent answer. Thank you for that one. Okay, I'm going to throw out another one. Let's talk about Lsat addendums. If someone has a 4 points higher the second time they take it, do you want to hear anything about it? Anyone? Okay, let me phrase the question this way. When do you want to see an Lsat addendum?
It depends. Go ahead, Vidal.
Yeah, no, I mean, for us, we like to hear have an Lsat addendum if we see any kind of major swing. If you took the Lsat more than once, we like to see, and there's usually our threshold is if it increases or decreases by 5 or more points. 4 is around there, so that's fine. But we like to see kind of why was there that kind of jump? What did you prepare differently? Did you encounter some sort of difficulty taking the test? Why is the reasoning? Because it is an aptitude test, so a major jump makes you kind of like, we don't want to assume anything, right? That's kind of the ongoing thread that we've been discussing. So definitely be transparent about that, because we want to know, again, yes, like if you prepare for the test differently, if there was some sort of circumstance that caused you to, be frazzled when you took the test, you had technical difficulties. I mean, painting a better picture for us is always beneficial than leaving anything, unsaid. So for us, it's optional, but provide an Lsat addendum if you think that it will help explain the bigger picture.
Very good, thank you. Anybody else on that one? Okay, I'm going to throw this question out there then, if anyone wants to answer, and then we'll get a little bit from the chat. Tell me if there is an addendum that you absolutely don't want to see, that students may have sometimes written to you. I'll ask you that, Lauren, since you're, do you see some that you don't want to see?
I'm trying to think. I think most of the addendums tend to be short and helpful. Again, leaving nothing unsaid, but perhaps my colleagues have other thoughts.
Okay. Anybody addendum you don't want to see?
Well, I was thinking about the Lsat addendum. If the first time you took the Lsat you didn't do well is because you didn't take it seriously and you didn't study, I don't need to know that. Like, don't, that doesn't make you look good. I wouldn't share anything like that. The other thing I think too, to be careful with addendums, particularly if you're talking about, let's say you want to make a correlation between how you performed on the SAT or ACT, not really being indicative of how you would be as a student in undergrad. So, you maybe didn't do so great on the SAT, but then you did really well in undergrad. Okay, say that, but only if it's true, right? Because sometimes I see that, but then you look at the person's transcript and cumulative GPA and you're like, but you didn't really do that good, right? So like, that doesn't really help advocate for you if you're trying to say, I didn't do so great on the LSAT, but I'll be a great law student. Same thing if you're talking about, let's say you feel as if you've had an upward grade trend because something significant was maybe like I'm trying to think. You had a bad semester because something personal was going on, but then that got resolved and then you did much better. Again, but only say that if it's true, right? Because we're going to see your transcripts, we're going to see all your grades. So if you say things like that, but then we look at your grades and we say, but your grade didn't really improve that much. Like those types of addendums to me are not helpful. I would just rather just don't say anything at all because it doesn't really make sense. And it's not really a good argument for yourself.
Excellent. I think that's a great point. Really think about it, about what you're trying to say when you have an addendum. Okay, Wendy, are there any questions from the chat we want to throw in here before we talk about letters of recommendation? Something in our resume or personal statement topic?
Yeah, there were a couple of questions about students' resumes who have less traditional backgrounds. So, how do you look at resumes from students with non-traditional backgrounds? Should they talk about what they did in college if they've been out for more than 5 years? Do you care about whether they have a master's degree, et cetera?
Excellent question. Who would like to jump on that?
We're talking about reentry students, right?
Correct.
Specifically. Okay, good. I think that there's value in any experience that you bring into law school, particularly if you have some mileage on your shoes. I think that's okay. I was an 8-year veteran of the Marines before I even started college. I was 26 when I started college, finished when I was 32. So did I feel like I had value as a freshman in college? Absolutely not. But teachers told me otherwise, and my peers told me otherwise, and I learned otherwise through the process. So as far as your resume is concerned, and any other pieces that you're adding to your application, so not specifically to the resume, I mean, I'm talking about everything. Those life skills and those life experiences will surface. It just naturally comes that way. So if you have an understanding of what it is that you want to write about in your personal statement, what it is that you want to touch on in your resume, definitely, discuss those things. On a resume, you should put all of the relevant work experience that you feel like you've had. It doesn't have to pertain to law school, but whatever relevant work experience you think that demonstrates your character, your commitment, consistency, that's all important. It really is.
All right. Anyone else, when we're seeing non-traditional students, do they have to go very far into college besides the fact that they got a degree? I guess the answer is you tell your story. And I think, like Dean Hernandez was saying, people will value, the experience that you had more than you think, more than you yourself think. So I think that's good. Anything else, Wendy?
Yeah, we had a couple of, we had 2 very specific questions that I thought were interesting and that I honestly don't know how to answer. One was whether undergrads should mention on their resume, whether they should mention research that they've engaged in if it wasn't published. And another about whether they should write an addendum if they canceled an LSAT score.
Ooh, let's start with research and what the interest in that is. Anybody want to jump on that one? I'll do like the students. I'll call on you guys. Yeah, Dean Fox, we haven't heard from you in a while. Do you want to see about research that wasn't published?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate the call on. Yeah, I mean, again, these are great questions, but this really goes back to, this is your application, and what should be in that application is what you feel is important about yourself. The admissions committee is relying upon you to paint that picture. So this is, if ever there was a time to bring it, it's now. And so if you're proud of your research, even if it wasn't published, I say go ahead and include it. For those of you, somebody asked over here, I did answer it, but I would say if you're asking, should I write an addendum about being non-traditional? If it's important to you, yes. I mean, it's not, it's not like you're going to be penalized for these things. Where again, this is your opportunity to kind of highlight to the admissions committee what has been meaningful in your life. And so, we value the different perspectives, we value the different experiences. So whether it's research, special research projects, and if you've anything, if you've written something, if you are a non-traditional, I mean, all of these things are meaningful and can be used to illustrate strengths that could translate to you being a successful law student. So just when you think about what to include, of all the things that you can include, number one, what's important that you feel for them, don't just throw it in there just because, but give it some self-reflection. What's important to me that you know about me? And also knowing what I know about law school, can I look at that experience, that perspective, that background, and highlight it in a way that sort of gels with what a lawyer does, or what whether or not that makes me a prepared student for law school, or how does that enhance what I can bring to the table, the law school table? Because I can tell you, I mean, everything you guys are asking about has been done, okay, and it's been done well. And it's been read and appreciated and valued, and people have been admitted who have done that. So just, it's not like if you include these things and you're a great applicant, and the admissions committee say, well, gosh, if they hadn't included that one thing on their resume, it would have been an admit. That's not a discussion that's going to happen. So I think you guys are on the right track by asking these questions, but also just know that we're really just relying on you to decide what some of these things should be in your application, because we don't know you.
That being said, my gut instinct as a pre-law advisor is that why you canceled an LSAT score is none of the concern of people in admissions. Does anybody have a different opinion than that? I can't think of any value added of here's why I canceled an LSAT score.
I might be curious if they cancel multiple scores, like 2, 3, 4, 5. Like, why are you canceling all these scores? But one, no, I wouldn't need to say anything.
And you all see cancels, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you'll see a number, you'll see a C, you'll see another number, kind of the same things we see on the report.
Right.
Okay.
And we'll see, right. And along that same vein, if you take the LSAT more than once, we see all your scores.
Right. So yeah, that's good. Thank you, Pilar. I appreciate that, because I've told students.
There's a question that I think is actually probably pertinent to just about everybody watching this right now. There's a question about letters of recommendation and how to deal with the fact that a lot of students who are applying now have not had an in-person connection with professors in a few years because of COVID. How is that going to affect your review? Is there something that students should do differently as a result, et cetera?
Thank you for that good segue. I see April has her hand up, though. Dean Fox, you can say what you're going to say, and then we will talk about. I think that's an excellent question about letters of recommendation, and I'd like to hear what everyone has to say about that.
Well, I had something to say, but I'll go ahead and address the letters of recommendation. So I just want to encourage you guys that everybody's in the same boat. Okay, so you are not unique in your angst about, well, gosh, I haven't actually laid eyes on my professor in their office yet, but that's everybody. And law schools know that. So, just as law schools have had to also understand that maybe there's a lot more online learning reflected on the transcripts, we also understand that professors are incorporating their observations of you based on online teaching. So I would not stress over that, because that's what you have to work with. We're in a pandemic. So, think about what professor you've had the most interaction with, maybe emails or, however. I've read some really fine recommendation letters from professors who have commented on how engaged students were in the online teaching, or how proactive the students were in doing virtual office hours, or how leadership, that how these students have exhibited leadership in rallying their colleagues and in projects that were assigned virtually. So there's still ways that these fabulous professors and advisors are finding to highlight your awesomeness. So don't just don't doubt it. One day we'll all return to normal, and this will not be a point of discussion, but right now it is what it is. And just do your best in thinking about picking the professor who you feel you've had the most interaction with, someone who can really comment on your class engagement, your writing, your participation, things of that nature. I would also just say, when it comes to recommendation letters, don't wait till the last minute to ask for those letters. I get a lot of requests for recommendation letters, and I do my best work when I have more than a day to write the letter. So I'm sure other people feel that way too. I bet some of these pre-law advisors have been asked for those letters. So, just you want the best letter that they can write. So give them the time. And you might approach them by asking, do you feel comfortable writing a favorable letter of recommendation for me? That doesn't mean they don't like you if they say no, but sometimes, and I know I was guilty of this as an undergraduate student, sometimes you feel like a recommender better than you really do. Just because like maybe they were your favorite professor or something, but just be sensitive to that sometimes they may not really know you as well as you think they do, and so give them that out. I know that sounds weird, but just if they hesitate or something, just go and have a plan B to ask somebody else. And also I would say be sure to just be prepared. Some recommenders may ask to meet with you before they write that letter. They may ask to see a resume, just so they can feel more confident about what they write, how they know you. That's something to think about. And also something, and I don't know how the other schools feel, but oh boy, really try to get those. I won't even say try. I'll just say don't use really, really old letters. Now, I don't think that's probably going to be the case for anybody here, but sometimes I see a recommendation letter and it's like 10 years old. Well, a lot can happen in 10 years. I mean, we want something fresh. We want to know who you are today, not who you were 10 years ago applying to law school. So, if there's anybody on the call here who has an older recommendation letter floating around that they may like to use, just be prepared to possibly get a phone call or an email from the law school asking you to get another one. That would not be an uncommon thing. I don't think. I don't want to speak for other law schools, but that's just kind of my point of view on that.
I'm going to go to Lauren next, and I'm going to ask you too about one of the questions that just came up that we can all address, and that is letters of recommendation from an employer that you've worked with for some time, who knows your work ethic and commitment, or does it always need to come from a professor?
Yeah, great. I was just actually working on a response, but yes, the letters of recommendation are really our way to not just know about your academic ability, but also like assess your potential as a future law student. So it's not just solely on academic. So for us, we like to receive, we require 2 letters of recommendation, but we like to see it from a variety of sources. So a letter of recommendation from an employer is perfectly okay. Someone who can really just talk about, you know, whether it's your work ethic, your commitment, your drive, someone that could truly vouch for you and recommends you. Not just someone that's regurgitating your resume in a letter of recommendation. We want someone that can add that extra spice or add that extra depth to getting to know you as an applicant. So whether that is an employer, or, you know, perhaps you volunteer at a nonprofit and the leader of that nonprofit can write a letter for you, or who have you, you know, that gives us another dimension of who you are as a person. So I would say it would be okay.
Okay. Dean Mensa, words of wisdom about rec letters. What do you like to see?
If someone is recently graduating from school, I do like to see one from a professor. If they've been out for a few years, then I understand that that's not really possible. I feel like it's already been said, you know, but it's most important that they know you well and can write a very detailed letter about you, rather than a high profile person or political person or a judge or things like that. I wouldn't worry about, you know, what they do, but more so what they can say about you, whether it's academic or professional. And Dean Fox touched on this already, but providing them with the resume and the personal statement, even possibly, and any other information that will be helpful for them. You want it to be easy for them to write something detailed about you. So if you give them that information and they have it right in front of them as they're writing the letter of recommendation that you've given them plenty of time to write, I think you'll find that those are going to be the most beneficial letters. That's what I personally did when I went through the process. I gave them, like, here's my transcript, here's my resume, here's my personal statement. I met with them. This is what I want to do. These are my goals. This is why I want to go to law school. So I just try to lay it all out there and make it as easy as possible. So that's usually my biggest tip, is to give them time and make it easy for them.
Have you seen some good letters of people who had these kind of Zoom relationships instead of in person?
You know, I can't say anything. I can't say anything that speaks to me. I think of more the letters that are not helpful.
Tell
Those
us
kind of
about
stick
letters
out
that
in
are not
memory.
helpful.
And those are going to be typically the ones that are very short. You can tell the person did not really have a relationship with the applicant, or the writer has a relationship with the applicant's parents, but not really the person applying. And so they'll say, I've known John since he was 5 years old, and he's such a great kid, and he did really well in school. And that's just not really helpful, unless there is the exception, unless then they go on to say, and they interned for me, or and they worked for me, and I saw this and I saw that. And so they can say more. But when it's just like the family friend or someone that's an attorney that knows dad, those are the ones that stick out to me as not being helpful. And I know it sounds crazy, but one that really sticks out is, it was a family friend, and he talked about how great the applicant was at raising an iguana. And I just was like, this could not be a farther reach. Like, I've never seen such a reach to try to find something positive to say. So yeah, I would stay away from family members and friends. Again, I said, unless the exception is that you do have some sort of professional relationship with that person as well.
Yeah. Dinobu, what have you seen in letters, and what impresses you?
I think I've definitely seen probably the same exact letters of recommendation that Dean Mensa just mentioned. Certainly, as she said, the ones that really sort of stick out to me are not for really good reasons. The unusually short ones, I'm talking like one sentence long. You know, it's kind of really sad for the applicant. As Dean Fox mentioned before, it kind of shows that, you know, that person doesn't really have the relationship they thought they had with the person they asked for the letter of recommendation. And so it's really important to really think about, you know, do I have the relationship with this person that I think I have? And so you don't want to have your grandmother or your father or your uncle or your older brother writing a letter of recommendation for you. I've seen things like that. It's a little awkward. but you want to find someone who is outside of your close circle, your family circle, who's able to sort of look at you through objective lens, and can tell us about the qualities that you have. If it's someone that has, watched you grow up, that's fine, so long as they have some sort of objective lens that they can look through. Perhaps you've helped them develop their nonprofit. Perhaps you've helped them, develop their company or something of that sort. Rather than, you just don't want them to send in a letter saying, "Hey, I used to change this person's diapers," because it just becomes embarrassing for everyone. You wanted to add depth to your application. I think what we're really trying to say about all these things, the personal statement, the addenda, the letter of recommendation, the letters of recommendation, you want them to add to your application and not distract and not take away value to your application. You just want to make sure that it's adding something of substance to your application, to your file, so that when we're reading through it, we're seeing another dimension, another dynamic, another side of who you are. You don't want it to just be, as I believe Lauren mentioned, a regurgitation of your resume, but you want it to be insight that only this person has about you as a professional, as an employee, or as a student.
Excellent, thank you. Dean Hernandez, any feeling from you about letters of recommendation during the digital era? And what are some of the things that you like and don't like about what you see?
I've got big feelings on the subject. Excellent,
let's hear it.
Well, first of all, the iguana rule applies at UNT Dallas College of Law. But here's what I think that the letters of recommendation demonstrate to us, among other things, is your ability to make relationships. How good are you at making relationships? And even better in a situation like this, because how can you try to make a relationship in a situation like this is to reach out to those people in those places and do an informational interview. If you're interested in a particular area of law, or you have a faculty member who is a lawyer, or somebody in that sphere, reach out to them, ask them if you can have a conversation with them. And when I say got it like that, what I mean is this is the kind of person that you would sit down and have a cup of coffee with, and you could share personal things, and they would be willing to share personal things with you about their lives so that you can come to an understanding with each other. Because really, that's what's required in these spaces for you to get a really stellar letter of recommendation from somebody who really understands you. You are a book, and you guys have read a lot of books, and you cannot write a paper on the book unless you read the book, right? So read your book to this person, right? Sit them down, go take them, have a cup of coffee if you can, and pay for their cup of coffee. They're gonna say, "Take it easy, kid." You're gonna be like, "Nah, I got this, because this is my meeting." And that's telegraphing something positive. And you have the discussion with them about what your intentions are. And imagine if you are on the other side, if you're a professional and an individual that's in college sits you down, pays for your cup of coffee, and has that conversation with you. And at the end of the conversation says, "Hey, I need somebody who's going to help me get through and beyond law school. Will you be that person for me? I need a mentor. Will you help me?" And wouldn't you say yes? Of course you would, right? So under those circumstances, and after that conversation about your life, then you can pop the question about the letter of recommendation, and they will deliver.
I think that's just fantastic advice. It's about showing you can build a relationship with your professors or your employers or the people at your internship or whatever. Excellent. I saved you for last, Heather, because does SMU still have the optional letters of recommendation? And if so, why is that? And what is it that you want to see if there is one that's submitted?
So I was actually what I was going to kind of briefly touch on. I know we're pretty much out of time, but I think that's where it's important that I know we've reiterated this throughout the entire panel, read the instructions for your applications. Each law school is different. Some of them require letters of recommendation. Some law schools require that they be from a professor. For us at SMU, you may submit up to 3. And we're very open and honest about this, and we make them optional, and they don't have to be from anybody specific, because as all of the tips that my colleagues have been sharing are why we make them optional. 95% of them, every application cycle sound the same. I mean, it kind of is what it is. And so we're very, very open about that. And so that's where we really want you to ask those professors that dig in deep. And if you have those professor relationships, if not, go to your employers. I know some of my other colleagues have mentioned if you're involved in a nonprofit, if you're involved in a church, we really do want to learn about who you are through those letters. You know, there's a difference in asking a professor who can just say that you did well on your midterm and you did well on the final and you did well on the assignments and you got a B+ in that class, an A-, whatever it is that you got. But we learned that on your transcript. It doesn't tell us anything about how you did personally in that class. And I think even over Zoom, you can build a relationship if you have a hard time in some sort of mathematics class or some sort of science class that's required as part of your major, and you end up with like a C in the class. But what we don't know by looking at your transcript is that you went to office hours, you worked with a TA, you took the professor's advice on study guides, and you really kind of went out there and still, you know, you got a C or C+, but that professor can speak and be honest about, you know, you admitted you struggled in something, had a hard time in the class. You may not have even passed it if you didn't go above and beyond when it came to the studying part. So that letter of rec, even though it's coming from a professor that you may have not got your highest grade in the class, you went out of your way and you worked to get that grade. That letter is going to tell us a whole lot more about who you are as a student versus the one that says you went to class, you signed in for class, and you did well on the midterms and got an A. Like, that doesn't tell us anything about who you are, how you study, how you overcome difficulties, how you admit when you have a weakness and get through those portions. So those are, and I think that kind of reiterates everything that all of my colleagues have shared too. You're really wanting to ask the people that can add to your application and that can say things about who you are personally, not just, I kind of know this person, they did okay in my class, or if they did okay in their job, they came to work when they were supposed to. So find those people that can go past that surface level and really dig deep and add to who you are.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's a good wrap up on. Does anyone have any other additional insights regarding letters of recommendation? Wendy, do we have any questions that we have not addressed yet?
I'm looking. There was a question in the chat that that I just answered, but I am not a law school admissions person, about athletics and how to address athletics and the sort of role that athletics play in your life on your application. Like how, for example, should you address that on your resume? What should you include?
I think that's
like college athletics.
Yeah, I've had a lot of good student athletes who ended up going to law school and doing very well. I think it's a good resume item, as I think someone said, is, as long as you were also making good grades, and there's a lot of positive. Anybody want to address our student athletes and what you see in their applications?
I would love to do that. So
Okay.
I have a great appreciation for student athletes. A lot of times this is how people are funding their education, through athletic scholarships. Yes, I mean, I like the advice that Wendy gives over there in the chat about sort of, noting the number of hours and what role you played perhaps in that athletic program. But also just remember that, you can't, I don't think anyone would dispute the fact that, juggling a demanding schedule like that takes some skill. And so if you were also able to maintain a good GPA and do full-on student athletic program. A student athlete, I think that says a lot about you and your discipline, your self-discipline. So again, this is about searching for the positive, accentuating the positive in your application, and thinking about what all of these things mean in relation to what is necessary to do well in law school. And law school certainly does take a lot of commitment and discipline and a lot of time management, which I think student athletes often understand. I would say just about student athletes, when you write your personal statement, I don't know about the rest of the panelists, but I do, and I'm sorry, and I'll speak quick. So sometimes I read personal statements, and I see this every year, and I receive a lot of statements like this. Applicants, when they're talking about why they're going to want to go to law school, I see a lot of talking about being involved in athletics and how important it was, and then there was some sort of injury sustained that ended an athletic career. And then that was the pivotal point that caused someone to think, well, I need to rethink my end game, what I want to do with my life. And then law replaced the passion that used to be for athletics. And that's the crux of the personal statement. And I just want to tell people, like, it's totally okay to maybe say that, but be careful, because just like I think, oh gosh, I can't remember which dean said this, but sometimes when you go down that path, it's easy in the personal statement to get lost in that dialogue. And you spend so much time talking about how much you loved being a student athlete that you didn't talk about anything about why you want to go to law school. And so what it looks like from the perspective of an person reading your application is that law school is just sort of like that old plan B. And so, you don't want that to be, that should not be the impression you leave on the admissions committee. But it's totally okay to talk about, if athletics, if that really was the thing that forced you to, pivot and turn toward law, that's fine. But again, don't let the whole statement be about how your identity was tied up in student athletics without ever moving on to talk about, now, why are we looking at law, and why do I have a seriousness of purpose about that decision in my life?
Great. Excellent. In fact, I think that is an excellent thing for us to end on today. I just want to thank every single one of our panel members. This has just been a wonderful and very informative. And I would tell our students who are out there, if you have questions about these individual law schools, do not hesitate to reach out to any of our admissions deans here. I know that they are happy to hear from you. You can go to their websites and find their email addresses. If you want to reach out to them, find out more about their universities. And I'm sure that they would be happy to hear from you and answer your questions. And so I do want to make a pitch. We will be, this is our last SWAPLA September series, but in the spring, we are going to start up again. We particularly want to get our friends at Access Lex to talk about how to finance your law school education. And so get some of our deans in and get our friends from Access Lex to talk about the money part in the spring. So I hope you all will tune in then. Okay, thank you much. And thank you for the thumbs up.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And Wendy, we can end the recording.